Okay, hello everybody. My name is Matt Logan. I work for Digital Guardian, and I'm here today to talk about how to successfully implement a data protection program. What we've seen in the past, and I've been working with data protection technologies for about 10 years, having worked for other vendors such as McAfee and Symantec. And data loss prevention has got a bad reputation over the years. People have never been able to correctly implement the solution. It's not just a technology, it's about people and process. And what I want to do today is guide you through how best to start a data protection program, and obviously talking a bit about Digital Guardian as well. If we can get this moving. Down, thank you, not up. There we go, that helps, thank you. So there are 4 key stages really to understanding a program and actually putting it into implementation. And the first one is to understand. So, you know, in the advent of GDPR data protection, we all have probably joined some workshops, we understand the fines, we understand what issues we have, and the complexities. But one of the key things is the 72-hour notification. So if you breach, if you lose data, within 72 hours, you need to be able to inform the local authorities that that data has gone. So the question is, do you know where your data is? Can anybody here put their hand up and say, yes, I know where 100% of my data is? Because I can guarantee that you'll have a database administrator somewhere who has a server under his desk and is taking copies of this data for testing purposes maybe, but the fact is it's sensitive data. If it's GDPR-related data and it's on a system that you're not aware of, if that is breached, if that is lost, then you have a data loss. You need to be able to inform the authorities within 72 hours. If you don't know the data's there, how are you going to inform them? So the key first stage is understand where your data is. What data do you have and where does it live? Then we can start building policies. So we have the initial discovery phase, and then we can start saying, okay, well, we know that certain databases, file shares, repositories contain sensitive information. Using Digital Guardian's technologies, we can install an agent onto endpoints, we can scan network shares and look for the data. With the endpoint agent, it says real-time data usage and building smart controls. We don't have to guess. If you take a traditional data loss prevention technology, you pretty much have to guess what you need to protect. So you say, okay, well, I think I need to protect credit card information. I think it's on this system, and we don't want more than 50 records going out of the organization. Put a DG agent onto those machines. We can show you what's happening with the data. We can show you where data's moving. We can show you who's touching the data. How are they sharing it? Is it going externally? Are they copying to Dropbox? Are they moving off to USB key? So using the technology to really prove out and give you factual evidence that you can then build a very succinct, controlled set of policies to make sure that data remains yours. There's the education as well. A lot of people forget about users. Your users are the people touching the data. Your users are the people who could potentially lose this data. If you have mobile workers, people with laptops, they're working at home, or you have a person who wants to work from home on a Friday, and they copy data to Hotmail because they can access it from the home machine. If you educate these users about what data is sensitive and how they should own that data, because they work for your company, so the data is their responsibility, if you can get them on board to understand what to do and how to manage that data, give them tooling as well. And I'll talk a bit about classification tooling, but give them the infrastructure and the tools to control that data, to tag that data, to mark that data as classified. But bring those guys on board. Bring your employees on board straight away. And then there's a continual process of assessing, redesigning, changing, administering, improving, updating, looking at all the event log information and working out, you know, where data's moving. Just to go into these 4 phases a bit deeper, the understand phase, we all understand GDPR, the regulatory compliance element, but there may be other regulatory compliances that you have to adhere to, PCI being another one. So we can use a network appliance to discover data at rest. So we connect, drop an appliance into your environment, and go and scan repositories, databases, file shares, tell you what data is on there. Using regular expressions and keywords, we can look for, say, GDPR-related data. So we can give you then an inventory of where that data is. Every organization has a certain form of intellectual property as well. It could be source code, it could be drug code, it could be formulas, it could be financial records, but something that's unique to your business, that if that gets out, that will have a financial impact on your organization. Everybody has that data. It could be just plain HR data. You've got to protect your employees' data, but as this theme is GDPR, there's a lot of data that you need to look and protect. Where does that data live? How is it being used? These are all questions that are very hard to answer. The data could be moving across the networks. It could live on file shares. It could be shared externally. You may have business-to-business processes or requirements to share data with external companies. And that can be done in any manner of forms, whether it's FTP uploads, web uploads. So really the first question is, how is that data being shared? Are we looking at data on the endpoint as well? As a user, I have a laptop, and I'm traveling all the time. So I'm on aeroplanes, I'm in airports. I'm constantly touching the company's data. If I don't have a way of looking at what that user's doing whilst they're mobile, whilst they're moving around, how are you going to protect that data? How are you going to then give the 72-hour breach notification if that happens? So drop an endpoint agent on, so you can see what users are doing. What are they doing with USBs? Are they copying, pasting? Are they printing? Are they moving stuff off to cloud services, Gmail? Are they opening cloud-based directories via a browser? Using Digital Guardian, we can show you all of this information without having to have policies in place, and that's the key. We can put policies in place eventually. Cloud's becoming a big issue as well. Not necessarily an issue, because we can trust the cloud providers to secure the data. Probably don't ask the question of where they replicate that data to some of the cloud providers, but certainly we can connect up to the cloud and run an inventory and tell you what data people are placing in the cloud with certain cloud providers. And we can do that with the network appliance. So if you think about this and how data is being shared, that's a lot of ways of manipulating, changing, editing, moving data. Build policies. We've done the initial discovery phase. We sit down with your organizations and we have discussions. And the key to really, starting off with a successful program is to work with your business units internally. Sit down with engineering. What are your top 5 critical assets? Sit down with human resources. What sort of data do you have on your employees, on your customers? Where's that data stored? From there, and using the visibility Digital Guardian provides with the agent out of the box, you can start building policies. This is an example here of just installing the agent and seeing how much data is being moved to removable media, printing, uploading, and emails. Again, install the agent, it shows you this. We can drill into this information and see, okay, we're looking at emails there. How much of them were web upload emails? What was attached to those emails? Who was the recipient? Where was it sent? Work with the business leaders, build some smart controls and policies. I mentioned users again. So before starting any of this, I would sit down and have workshops with all the employees. Hey, Mr. Employee, do you understand how sensitive certain data is? You work in HR. Do you understand how sensitive payroll information is? If you work with employees, get them on your side to begin with. You have a better chance of hopefully controlling data. Using Digital Guardian, we can put pop-ups, present warnings to the user. So when we start implementing policies, we can start using controls at that point to say, okay, when you violate a policy, let's give them something to look at. Tell them what they did. So in this case, they're attempting to copy out PST files, so email backup files. We can ask for justification, we can stop, block, and control. So this is where the real DLP elements come in to control the data flow. With the education and enforcement, what we find as well is over time, when we start putting these pop-ups, so the prompts are the blues and the number of employees. So we see a lot of prompting to begin with. So when we start putting this in process, a lot of pop-ups are appearing on people's screens. After a period of time, the users are aware of these pop-ups. They see that they're getting looked at, the data they're moving or whatever they're trying to do. If they're trying to move stuff to cloud, for example, or off to email, they start reducing their behavior or changing their behavior based on the number of informational pop-ups they receive. With the aim, and this is actual customer data, anonymized, but we can see over time fewer employees result in and fewer pop-ups, which means our employees are understanding what is sensitive, what is not sensitive, and how data should be moved. The ultimate aim is to reduce the number of incidents. With any data loss prevention program, you're going to generate a lot of incidents to begin with. The aim is to reduce them. You don't want to overload your data protection officer or your person handling the DLP product with massive amounts of alerts and incidents. With the old-fashioned data protection ways, you would have that because you're guessing the policies. Guessing creates false positives. False positives creates quite a headache for your administrators. But if you understand the data, build policies, educate and enforce, and continue to process, we can drive the incidents down per week to a manageable amount. So the architecture is quite simplistic. This looks quite complex, but we have the endpoint architecture here. And on the endpoint, we have a single agent that works on a Windows, Mac, and Linux endpoints. And with that one agent, we can perform various functionality, DLP functionality. So we can stop, block, alert, quarantine information. We can perform forensics on that endpoint. Our agent is a kernel-level agent, so it sees every single activity on the endpoint. We see all of the data events, system events, user events, and we can then piece together a good image of what people are doing on that endpoint. Whether you want to see log-on, log-offs, reboots, application installs, we can control applications, whitelist applications, blacklist applications. We can control devices. Having this level of visibility, we can take all that event data and send it up to the management console. This helps us with our advanced threat protection module as well. Let's not forget here, all Digital Guardian is really caring about is the data. It's making sure your data remains your data. But if you have, let's take a spear phishing attack, for example. If you receive an email, looks like it's been sent from somebody internally. The user opens that email, they open the attachment, they double-click the macro, because most users don't understand that pop-up when it appears. That's a normal set of activities that we recognize. But we also know that that's the sort of entry point for some malicious attacks. So we will then start watching what happens next, and that's the key. Digital Guardian will see all of the unusual activity, system files being changed, DLL files, dropper files being placed, external calls being made to command and control servers. The key here, though, again, and I keep saying it's all about the data. We can see this stuff. Yeah, we can see an advanced threat. We can tell you if you're in the middle of having ransomware downloaded to your machine. We can see the deletion of backup files. We can see the mass encryption of files. The key here is, though, we can stop your data leaving your environment. We can stop the advanced attack happening. We have the ability to stop, kill executables. But ultimately, whether they're trying to encrypt your data or steal your data, it's your data. So we're here to make sure that that remains in your control. Classification. On the endpoint, there's 3 different types of classification. We can look at the content of a document. What's in it? We're looking for keywords, regular expressions. Scan a document. If there's something in there, take the word confidential, for example, we can add a permanent tag. That's okay, it does the job, but generates some false positives. We have contextual-based classification. Where's the file coming from? Has it come from a SharePoint site? Is that SharePoint site sensitive? When that file is downloaded to an endpoint machine, we'll then tag the file. That tag defines the controls. The third one is a user-driven classification module. So we empower our users to classify data. When they create a Word document or a Microsoft Office document or hit send on an email, they're prompted with a pop-up that says, please choose your classification marking that's suitable for this document or email that you're sending. And that can place visual markers. But the key with classification is the tag that we add defines the controls. So the controls around how that file is shared. Stop this particular file that's top secret being emailed external. Keep this file internal. Make sure people can't print screen that document. Make sure they can't copy to USB. This document is so sensitive, it can only be shared to certain executives in the organization based on Active Directory groups. This is one agent on the endpoint that does all this functionality. On the network side, we have the ability to discover data. This is where the GDPR data discovery assessment comes in, so we can put a physical or virtual appliance in your network, and then we can go and connect off to repositories, scan for data, Whether we do this using fingerprinting or we just do keyword matching, we can tell you where all of your GDPR data is residing. We can show you, as long as we connect to that repository, where it is, what it is, and who has access to it. We also have the ability to connect to email gateways and web proxies as well if you wanted to perform network DLP functionality on data in motion. You get the real benefit from doing most of this on the endpoint. So one of the age-old arguments I always receive is concern about another endpoint agent. If you put this endpoint agent on the machine, it gives you so much more. We can control the data. We can show a lot more functionality. We can do stuff you can't do in the network. So again, if you encrypt data, if somebody password protects a zip file, sends it across the network, we're not going to see it. It's password protected, but we can look at it before it gets password protected on the endpoint. All this information is fed up into the management console, the DGMC. It's very scalable. We have one management console, 350,000 machines per management console, which covers most size organizations. Information is fed up from the endpoint, from the network, and it's all shared. I did mention cloud as well, so we have the ability to go and scan cloud repositories with those providers listed up there. So we can connect off via CASB, go and have a look at the information in cloud, and we can remove it if necessary. But the key is to give you an inventory of what data assets you have in the cloud. Let me just jump back a second. So the very top is our latest offering. So it's a new service that we're offering. It's a software as a service. It's a SaaS-based offering. It's a cloud analytics reporting cloud. What we do is we take all the data from all of the endpoint events, so all across the Windows, the Mac, and the Linux agents that have been deployed, as well as the network, feed it through the management console into the cloud. This allows us to perform real-time analytics on the data. So we can look at the data quickly, fast. We can empower incident responders to understand what's going on in the environment. If you have teams of people who are paid to analyze data flows, activities, they're responding to threats, they're looking at alarms and issues that are going off in the environment, the SaaS-based cloud offering, Arc, is the best thing for that. It gives people the ability to create their own workspaces, their head-up displays, and really look at what's going on in the environment, to perform investigations. So, for example, if you've got a machine that's been compromised, if we see an attack happening on a certain machine, we can drill into that machine and have a look at it. Who's last logged into that machine? What applications are installed on that machine? What data, what sensitive data has moved off that machine? And again, this is all great stuff, but I'll bring it back to the fundamentals. We're here to protect your data. So we can show you all this stuff, but the key is that we will keep the data yours. We'll keep it safe, and we'll make sure that you own that data. Here's some examples of some of the interfaces you can see. So it's not necessarily about collecting all of this information, this logging information, but you need to be able to present it back in a format that makes sense for managers, for high-level executives, even down to the incident responder or the analyst who can look at the in-depth forensics playout of that data event. So there's many different ways of manipulating this data and presenting it back to the incident responder themselves. I keep repeating this, and apologies, but it is all about the data. That's all we care about. Whether we're protecting it using data protection technologies, whether we're looking at advanced threats and understanding what the threats are, how the threats are hitting your environment, what they're doing, putting a stop and block. The key here is the response piece. If we can show you where your data is, if we can provide you the tooling to control that data, classify, stop, block, protect, make sure the data only moves to places where you think it should move to, and give the responders enough information to be able to respond, to mature the program, to increase the capabilities of the rules and the policies. The ultimate aim, as I keep saying, is to make sure that you have full control over your data. Now, we run data discovery assessment scans for GDPR. It's one of the things we can do. And these are the sort of the 5 key questions that we start with. There's many different ways of approaching this, but before we start looking at where your data is, what is a data subject? What information do you have on data subjects? We're all data subjects here as long as we're apart from myself being British, soon to be Brexit, but I think we'll soon to leave Europe, unfortunately, but, and Luke, of course, as well. But we're all data subjects. We will remain data subjects as well. But how sensitive is that data? And it's more of a volume-based question, because a single person's record is sensitive. If it's my first name and last name, it's probably not too sensitive, but if it's my first name, last name, home address, social security numbers, driving license number, and then there's 50 people in this spreadsheet, for example, then we're starting to increase the sensitivity. So we can work out sensitivity based on volume, numbers of records. But bearing in mind, even if you breach one single person's records, you need to alert within 72 hours. Where does the data reside? And this is the first question I asked. Do you know where all of your data is? And I guarantee no one here will do. I've only met one company who says they know where all their data is, and I'm pretty certain they don't. How does it flow internally? How do you share data? How do you use it within the organization? Who should receive it? Should HR receive information from engineering? Probably, makes sense. But should HR share the CEO's payroll information with engineering? No. So look at the data flows. How is this information being used throughout customer records as well? Because it's not just about your employees, it's about customers, if you have customer records. And how is it shared externally? Do you have to share with other businesses? Do you have to keep it internal? These are all key questions to ask. Now, with the risk assessment we offer, we can come along, we can put a virtual appliance in your environment. We can connect to certain repositories, CIFs, NFS shares, databases, wherever your data may be. We can put in keywords, regular expressions, based on your local wording and dialect and the regional differences, and then we can start looking for that data. So we'll run a quick scan, we'll connect off, we'll prove that we can see GDPR data. We ran a scan in Slovakia for a Slovakian government agency, and within 8 hours we found enough GDPR data to get that person quite interested in the product and what we do. We ran it for a further 72 hours, and we found 500,000 individual GDPR-related records in a group shared area that the whole company had access to, which can be quite concerning because, again, it depends on the level of trust. You may trust all of your employees, but then you may want to trust, and not to stereotype, but maybe call center staff differently to executive staff because call center staff tend to be quite fluid. You move through staffing quite quickly. If you have all that data in one shared area, then there is a lot of potential and high risk that that data could be lost. And it may not be malicious. It may be inadvertent data loss, where someone accidentally copies something. Not necessarily someone stealing data for their own benefit. We can run this scan. We then produce a nice report that shows you details of level of sensitivity or severity based on the number of record counts, for example, across different shares. So in this example, we scanned an internal server, a SharePoint site, and box.com. So we connect off to those repositories. We look for GDPR-related data. So in this case, we're using first name, last name, home address. If it was in the UK, postal address, my driving license number, my national insurance number, which is a social security number equivalent. And we can then report back, and we don't just present it in a high level, we can drill down and show you exactly where that data is, what repositories. Because one of the other things with GDPR is the right to be forgotten. The key, it's a very hard thing to do, but I could ring up a company who I've dealt with in the past and say, you need to remove all data on Matt Logan now. You need to forget me as a company. You can only do that if you know where all that data is. And again, that's a very hard thing. The right to be forgotten itself is going to be very complex because how do you go and scrub individuals' records from databases, file shares, documents? That's a whole different ballgame. But to begin with, you need to know where all the data is for an individual. We can show you where that data is. This will be a continual process. We can run a one-off scan, but your data sets are going to change. People will be copying data, moving it to endpoints, duplicating data. And your data cycle, data's fluidic in its very nature, so it will constantly change and move. So this is a continual scan. But as an assessment, we can come in and show you what we can do. We can look at data in motion as well. So there's data at rest, which is static on a file server in a database. but also what's moving across your network, what's passing through your email gateways, what's moving out through your web gateways. This is all network-based activities. We can run GDPR scans on the endpoint as well with the endpoint agent. So there's many different ways we can look at it because, again, your data will be spread everywhere. I guarantee you on most laptops there'll be a lot of sensitive data. So all in all, we're just talking about the very tip of an iceberg here. Now, certainly using one technology is not going to make you GDPR compliant. I'm not saying that using this, we will make you GDPR compliant. We will certainly help you on the road to GDPR compliance by showing you where your data is. That's the first step. So that's the executive risk assessment. Where is your data? What's it doing? Who has access to it? Who can touch it? Who can see it? Once we've got a good picture of that, and maybe at the same time we've deployed some endpoint agents, so we're looking at how the endpoints are being used, what applications are installed, what people are doing on those endpoints, what are your users doing? Are they copying data? Are they moving it to Gmail, Dropbox? We're building up this picture of the data flows around your environment, both across the network and on the endpoints. We then can start putting classification in place. That's the key. Classification is a very important piece. We can do this, we can automate this. It doesn't have to be a process. There's a lot of people who get concerned with classification of legacy documents. How do I classify all my old documents that are really sensitive? Well, if they've been sat on a server for 5 years and no one's touched them, don't worry about them. No one's touching them. They may be sensitive, but you know they're on that server, but no one's touching them. But we will have a policy that says if anything moves from that server to an endpoint, then we'll classify. So it may not have been touched for 5 years, but the moment a user grabs that file and you know it's sensitive, we'll automatically tag that file and make sure it's classified. But for new data, empower users, bring your users on board, get them to understand what they should do with data and how they should classify it. So there's automated ways and bringing users in the mix as well. Then you start putting your controls in place. So we understand what we want to protect, where is the data, what are they doing, classify it, control it. Stop copy, paste, print screen, stop email upload, stop copying to USB, and then putting the controls in place and encrypting the data as it moves to USB, enabling your users, prompting your users, getting them to understand how to perform or how to look after data. Incident response plans. You need to be able to respond within 72 hours of a breach. You need to be able to clean up after that breach. You might have to prove that you didn't lose data. If something hits the press, the newspapers, before you realize, you may have to prove that it wasn't you. We have a customer in the US, and they work for the big production studios, and they do parts of films. They make small animations. Now, if a part of a film or a film is leaked onto the internet before the film hits the cinemas, this production studio fines all of the smaller companies $1 million each, instantly. You give me $1 million. It's in their contract. So they hand the film studio $1 million. Now, they then have to prove that it wasn't them who lost the data in order to get their $1 million back. And how do you prove it wasn't you who lost the data? You have a product like this that's mapping all the data. It's watching the data flows. I can see these 5 designers are working on this clip. We recognize they store the data in this specific repository. We can see the data flows from that back to the endpoint. And we can prove that they didn't copy it off to USB. They didn't upload it to the web. So it's proving that you didn't do something that's also very valuable and important when it comes to GDPR. So that all comes down to your incident response plans as well. So how do I prove it wasn't us? How do I respond? How do we fix an issue? Finally, the ultimate aim is to demonstrate compliance. I think a lot of companies are a long way off when it comes to GDPR particularly because it's not even the 25th of May. There's a lot of people who are sitting back and waiting until the 25th of May to see what happens. There's a lot of people waiting for a company to be the first person fined. Someone's going to get fined eventually, and I think when that first fine lands, then we'll start seeing a lot more people looking to put GDPR in play. That's it from me. Any questions? It's the end of the day. It's been a long day for everyone, so it's, yeah.
This was a long day.
Yeah, very long day. But, yes, question.
Right. I'm wondering, what about the security of the digital guardian itself? So, is it being subject to penetration testing? So, how it's hacked? As long as you are telling that is getting access to absolutely all the sensitive data in the company, to all the data flows and so on, it becomes the cornerstone of the security itself. So, therefore.
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah.
So we regularly perform, we employ external companies to penetration test our products on a regular basis. So every time we release a new point patch or an update to the product, we bring in external companies to penetration test. But the real key here is how we architect the solution. So if you have the management console in your environment where we don't take any data, we can run it as a managed service if you wish. But if you have a management console in your control with your endpoint agents, the endpoint technology itself and the network technology is all encrypted, the communication paths between the endpoint and the management console, we only share metadata. So with some of our competitors, if someone breaches a policy with a 50 meg Word document that contains credit card information, some of our competitors will take that file and send it to the management console. We don't do that. We just share metadata. Who, when, what, why, where. So what we find then is in a day, roughly, if you take a Windows machine with, I don't know, 10,000 events per day, there or thereabouts, we can take that information, we condense it down, and over one day, the metadata is only 450 kilobytes worth of data. All that data is broken up into what we call bundles. Those bundles are digitally signed and encrypted, so the communication is secure. The management console itself is secure by its very nature. We can connect to Active Directory and use your AD credentials to log in, log out. We have very granular control within the management console. We've been selling this technology into Germany for some time, who have workers' council, and you need to have what they call a four eyes principle on the more secure data. So we can anonymize the data in the management console. We can see computer, ABC, user 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's varying levels that we can make sure the data remains secure. But yes, we do penetration test regularly the technology. Hi.
Yeah, just a quick question around the classification part. Who'd have thought it?
Yes.
You talk about classification as part of DLP. How important is classification? Because you offer those sort of 3 tiers of classification. How important are they for sort of future discovery? Because I know that you go out and rediscover and rediscover and rediscover. Do you use the metadata from the classification engines as part of that discovery process?
Yes, we do, yeah. So on the endpoint, we can automatically classify once we've discovered. So if there's data at rest, we can go off and find it and tag it and do that on an automatic basis. When you're rediscovering and rescanning, you're only doing incremental scans, so you're looking for the changes. So there'll be fewer types of classification, but certainly the key is making sure that classification is correctly added to a file and it remains on that file. And it doesn't matter how much manipulation the user does to the file. For example, let's take a spreadsheet and it contains credit card information. A user could rename that spreadsheet to holiday and change the extension to JPEG. So that file looks like it's changed. They could then compress that file. They can then password protect that file. You can even open it in a hex editing tool and try and strip out the header and footer to try and manipulate the file. What Digital Guardian does, it constantly watches every change. So if we've tagged it once, it doesn't matter what you do to that file, every reiteration of that file is a change, and we'll constantly tag. So the ultimate goal is you have a file that looks like a compressed holiday.jpg picture. It doesn't matter. We know that there's credit card information in there. So we use that sort of functionality to ensure that we are always tagging data, always controlling. As you know, one of our partnerships, we happen to work for, empowers users. And I think that's key as well. It's not just a case of automatically classifying data. It's bringing your users on board to trust them to classify correctly. So there's many, many ways. But yes, it's a very important part of a data protection program to ensure that data is classified so that we can then control based on that classification. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. And we have a small present for you.
That's very kind.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.